Hello and welcome to this Mikhail Tal video where Tal battles Bobby Fischer. And this was early in Fischer's career in the 1959 Candidates Tournament, where Bobby Fischer was about 17 and Tal, I believe, was 22 at the time. And Mikhail Tal would go on to win the World Chess Championship in 1960 against Botvinnik and hold the title until 61 when Mikhail Botvinnik took the title back. So in this game against Fischer, Bobby Fischer begins with e4, as Bobby Fischer usually does. He was known for playing e4 quite often, almost exclusively with the white pieces, especially in the early and mid part of his career. He did change it up later in his career, but we have e4 here. And Tal, he continues with c5, the Sicilian defense. Now, Bobby Fischer was having trouble with the Caro-Kann, and I read that in this candidates tournament, Mikhail Tal picked up the c pawn, put it on c6, still holding on to the pawn, looked up and smiled at Fischer as if to say, I know you have trouble with the Caro-Kann. Should I play it against you or not? And Bobby Fischer, just stared at him and didn't do anything and didn't respond. And Mikhail Tal pushed the pawn to c5 instead, playing the Sicilian defense, which Bobby Fischer became well known for playing in response to e4. So maybe Tal wanted to give Fischer a taste of his own medicine. So the game continues with knight to f3, a standard move in the Sicilian defense that helps fight for the d4 square so that you can push that d pawn. So now we have d6, helping to cover this e5 square to prevent a possible or discourage a possible pawn push harassing a knight that may land on f6. So the game continues with d4, the open Sicilian, if we have an exchange here, and we do. So pawn captures and Fischer recaptures. So if we look at the position here in the Sicilian defense, especially for you beginners, what do we have here? Well, white has more space, a knight developed in the center, but white has one central pawn versus two for black. So one strategy for the black side in the Sicilian defense is to try and exchange off pieces and go into an endgame where they might have a little bit of an advantage, especially with more pawns in the center. So the game continues with knight to f6, a common move attacking this unprotected pawn on e4. So Fischer just develops a piece and protects it at the same time. And now we have a6 being played, the Najdorf variation, which is one of Bobby Fischer's favorite lines against e4, playing the Sicilian defense, the Najdorf variation with this a6 pawn push. So once again, maybe Mikhail Tal is trying to get in Fischer's head, playing Bobby Fischer's favorite defense against Fischer. So here we go. We have bishop to c4. And Fischer was known to play this bishop to c4 move against the Sicilian here. So what does this do? It lines up on the weak f pawn here that's only protected by the king. It helps cover this important d5 square, because a lot of times in the Sicilian, the black side will want to push that d pawn and break here with the d5 pawn push, and it kind of frees up space for black a little bit, who has a little bit of a cramped position here. So now we have e6, a common move blocking the path of the bishop towards that f pawn, and also reinforcing the d5 square for a future pawn push to d5. So now we have the bishop just dropping back here. Kind of a prophylactic move, trying to move that bishop out of the line of fire in case the pawn decides to push forward here and attack it. Or we could even have, this pawn pushing and attacking. But the game continues with Mikhail Tal pushing this pawn anyway, gaining space on the queen side, a possible threat of just attacking the knight, which is protecting this pawn. So what does Fischer do? He ignores that for the moment and just pushes forward here with f4. So the game continues with b4, and the computer says this is an inaccuracy that swings the game from if black would have played bishop to b7 here, adding some more pressure to this e-pawn. The computer likes that move better, saying that it's an inaccuracy here to push this b-pawn and attack the knight. It's trying to attack the knight, drive that knight away, and maybe snatch up this pawn. So let's see what happens. We have knight to a4 being played by Fischer. And the computer says that that is the best response here. It kind of stops a pawn storm. If Fischer, he's already pushed his f-pawn, he could still castle kingside, but if he decides to castle queenside, well, this knight here prevents a pawn storm from marching forward here. It blocks the path of that bishop. And, usually you don't want to put a knight on the rim. A knight on the rim is dim. Because it doesn't control as many squares. But here it does a good job of blocking a pawn storm on the queen side. So now we have an unprotected pawn here. Will Tal go after that pawn? Let's find out. He does in fact snatch up the pawn, the best move in the position. But even though Fischer is down a pawn for the moment, the computer says, or at least indicates that white still has about a third of a pawn's worth advantage here. And let's see what happens. We have castling. Fischer finds the best move, getting the king to safety, bringing the rook towards the center, which, it helps cover the f-pawn, but maybe the rook would even want to move here to e1 and line up on the opponent's king that's still stuck in the center here. So the game continues with g6, and we have a mistake by Tal here. He's apparently preparing to fianchetto the bishop, which will line up down through the center and aim here at the queen side. So the computer actually likes a retreat of the knight with knight to f6 instead. So let's see if Bobby Fischer can take advantage of this position here, of the mistake that Tal has made. So he doesn't pick the best move, which the computer believes is bishop to e3 here, centralizing the bishop, getting a piece out, developing it, preparing to bring this rook towards the center or move the queen up and connect the rooks. So Fischer decides to immediately attack here, and the computer says this is still a good move. And after the best move being played by Tal, capturing towards the center, now the knight is protected. The rook does have a half-open file aimed here, so let's see what happens. What does Fischer have in mind? He finds a brilliant move here. So brilliant move by Fischer, capturing, giving up his knight here. So instead of taking, which apparently the computer says that would have been best to go ahead and grab that knight, but it would have opened things up with that king stuck in the center. So instead, Tal develops his rook on the half-open file, lining up on Fischer's king. And now we have bishop to d5. Fischer has placed both of his pieces here under attack by the same pawn. So two brilliant moves in a row by Fischer. And now Fischer is attacking the unprotected rook here in the corner. So what will Tal do here? Apparently rook to a7 is the best move. Interestingly, how Fischer has both of his pieces under attack here, and the best move is not to capture either one, but get that rook out of the line of fire. So rook to a7 is found, and now we have Fischer snatching up the knight. So now Bobby Fischer is ahead +2 in material here. The computer gives a little over a +1 advantage to Fischer. So what happens next here? Well, we have capture of the knight, the best move in the position, and now Tal is ahead +1 in material. But after Fischer captures here, material is even. Tal responds with a centralization of his rook here. And, it helps defend the king, which is just hanging out right here in the middle of the board. And so the game continues with a capture of the bishop here. And so after recapture, we have bishop developing, and apparently this is a mistake by Fischer. He's maybe threatening to capture here, target the rook, but the computer says rook to f2 would have been better to help protect this g pawn that the rook is lined up on here, and get a rook off the back rank where maybe you can swing the queen over, or bring the queen up here and double up, have a battery aimed at this f pawn, although for the moment it is being guarded by this rook. So now the game continues with Tal forking here. So great move by Tal. He's forking this g pawn, threatening a mate and the knight at the same time here. So even though it looks like Tal is about to go ahead by a knight here, that's possible, the computer calls the game almost dead even. So here we go. We have the queen blocking, the knight is picked off, and the computer says that rook to g6 would have been better than capturing that knight. So the game continues with bishop capturing, targeting the rook here. So instead of getting that rook to safety, Tal counterattacks Fischer's queen here. So what does Fischer do? Well, he snatches up a piece here, and now we have the queen targeting the unprotected piece, but now Bobby Fischer is ahead by +1. So instead of protecting that piece, Fischer finds the best move, keeping the game dead even, and that is to get the king out of the line of fire of this rook. So now the queen snatches up the bishop, going ahead +2 for Tal, and the game continues with a check here, a mistake. Apparently bringing the other rook to the center needed to be played in this position to keep the game even. But after this move, Tal goes ahead. Will he find the best move here? Yes, he does. He just blocks the attack of the queen here, but his king is still kind of just hanging out open there in the center. So now we have the best move being found by Fischer. That rook that was just doing nothing much at all over here in the corner centralizes, attacking the king. And so the game continues with a great move being played by Mikhail Tal here. Instead of running with the king, he keeps that pin here by the queen, pinning the knight to the king, and instead Tal brings his bishop up off the back rank, And so the game continues with another mistake here by Fischer. So he captures the pawn. What does Fischer have in mind here? It looks like queen to f6 would have been better, which would, if we go back and look at that, if you play queen to f6, the bishop can't capture the queen because of this pin, and there's a threat of capturing the pawn. So the rook would probably have to move over here and defend. But Fischer makes a mistake. He gives up his rook for that pawn, but he is able to capture this other rook. But instead of doing that, he chases the king. So now we have bishop to f8, protecting, and Fischer goes after the rook. So now material is +1 for Tal. If we look at this, Fischer has 5 pawns versus Tal's 3. So 2 pawns for Fischer versus a bishop. And it doesn't look like that'll be enough according to the computer, but Fischer does have Tal's king kind of hanging out in the open here. So what will Fischer do next? He finds, Tal has to move first, and Tal does find the best move. He's ahead in material, and when you're ahead, it's usually good to trade off pieces, whereas if you're behind in material, it's usually better to trade off pawns. So an attack on the queen here. Fischer keeps the queen, sliding over here, eyeing these pawns, at the same time having the option to bring the queen down here to target the king, or even move here with a check. So, Fischer wants to keep that queen on the board so he can continue to harass the pawns and Tal's king. So, rook steps up here, and now the rook will be able to help block if there is a check down here. So the game continues with pawn attacking. Fischer's attempting to get rid of the pawns. So we have pawn protecting here, and now instead of exchanging pawns, we have a check. So king runs here, and the queen drops back, helping protect the pawns. So let's see what happens next. And, it's better to keep your queen centralized, especially if you need to harass your opponent's king there. There are more options from the center of the board than the side. So now we have bishop dropping back to protect the pawns and capture. So the first exchange of pawns here on the queen side here. And now, after recapture, pawn moves up here to g3. Computer says that's a good move, but it would have been better to just push to a3, maybe try and just exchange those pawns off. So now we have queens confronting one another. Once again, Tal is trying to trade off material, and now it's forced because of this check to the king and attack on the queen. So Fischer, instead of trying to exchange with the queens immediately, he just brings his rook up. And Tal trades off the queens. Now we have an attack on the unprotected B pawn. So what will be done here? What will Tal do? He finds the best move, getting behind his not past pawn, but getting behind his pawn. And now king starts to centralize, always important in the endgame, especially when Tal has an extra bishop that Fischer does not. You have to use all your pieces that you can here. So Tal, he gets the same idea, bringing his king to the center, although bishop to f6, it appears that would have been a better move. And now we have king moving up here. Tal continues to press his king forward. And now the kings are in opposition from one another here. And bishop attacks. So Fischer is forced to drop back. Now, this rook is doing a good job of guarding the fourth rank here, preventing the king from moving forward at the moment. So what does the king do? Attack the rook here. So now we have king protecting, bishop attacking the unprotected b pawn. So Fischer drops back to guard that. And now the bishop lines up on these pawns that are on the same color squares as that bishop. So, it prevents this h pawn from moving, or the g pawn will be captured. And so the game continues with rook centralizing, putting, aiming at the bishop, not really putting pressure on it. It's guarded by the king. And so rook slides over to the f file, perhaps with a threat of targeting the king here. So the game continues with the rook stepping over to the other side. Now we have check, king drops back, and the game moves on here. Fischer grabs the opposition once again, trying to keep the king out of his position. And the bishop steps forward here, and now there's a threat here of trading off the rooks, which would not be too good for Fischer. So what does Fischer do? He decides to try and knock out this pawn while he can, because if Fischer can get rid of the two pawns and the rooks are traded, of course you cannot checkmate with just a king and a bishop. So the game continues with an attack. An attack on the rook here. So Tal rightfully keeps his pawn on the board here, avoiding the exchange. And now rook up to c8, finding the best move in the position, threatening to try and harass the king here. And the game continues with a capture of the pawn. Fischer checks. The king runs back up the board. We have an attack on this pawn, but after this check, the king steps up, once again grabbing the opposition, targeting the pawn. So check, king sidesteps, and now an attack on Fischer's rook. So Fischer moves the rook forward. And it says that's a good move, but it would have been better just to go rook to h8, try and knock this pawn out. So the game continues with bishop stepping back to a1, a great move here, and now Tal is winning. So let's see how Tal wrapped this game up. And here, after a4, the best move in the position, we have b2. And this is where Fischer resigned, because the best move, would be to just capture the rook. But then you think, all right, if Fischer captures that rook, the pawn is guarded by Fischer's rook, covering the queening square, but not really. Because if Fischer captures the rook on c3, when the pawn moves, it'll be a discovered check. And that would be winning for Tal. Now, I'll take a look at this more in the computer analysis, but before I do, let's look at a quick game review. Let's see. It looks like Mikhail Tal played with 94.8% accuracy in this game versus 89.4% by Fischer, which is still not bad. And Fischer did have some brilliant moves. He had two, Tal had one. Fischer had one great move, but Tal had 9 great moves in this game. And now, this was 1959 when Tal would be world champion in the following year, and Bobby Fischer, this is still young in his career. He's only 17. This was probably his first World Championship Candidates Tournament. So, he was still learning and improving his game. So, the bad moves, inaccuracies here. Let's see. We have 2 inaccuracies by Tall, 3 mistakes by Fischer, and 1 by Tall. And that's it. No misses or blunders. So, looking pretty good here for Mikhail Tall on his road to becoming world champion. And in the future, I'll show videos that feature more games between Fischer and Tall. I also do a Bobby Fischer series, so maybe I'll have a game in there where Fischer plays against Tall. All right, what could have happened here? So if we go back to the computer analysis and look at how the game may have continued after Fischer resigned here. Well, you see, if Fischer would have snatched up this rook, well then you have promotion to a queen with this discovered attack now, so the rook doesn't have time to capture. So here, funny thing, the best move is king to d2, and that's the only way that Fischer can avoid a mate. Otherwise, there's a mate in 9 if the king goes to, if you have rook to b2. I mean, why would you do that? Just give up the rook. Or king up to c4, it's a mate in 2. So, I mean, we could take a look at that. If the king goes up here, well then you have what? Queen to c2 check, and the king is going to get mated with either king to d5, and then you have a great pattern here where the queen covers these 2 sides and the diagonal, and the bishop covers the other 2 escape squares. So, that's one way the game could have ended quickly. Another option is, let's see here, and it is the best move to go ahead and capture that rook. So the queen, or pawn promotes to queen, and the best move according to the computer is for the king to run towards the center here. The queen is under attack still, so queen to a2, and now you have what? King up to e3 maybe. Queen could just go ahead and capture here. But the computer says there's a mate in 20 with queen to a3. Now the queen can capture this pawn and target the rook. So king to e2, keeping the king centralized. But the other option is bring the bishop in and help. Or you could just capture this. But queen and bishop versus the rook here. Tall would have just finished this off easily if the game went on. All right, well, feel free to leave comments, like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.